I've known Warlimpirrnga Tjapaltjarri for about 19 years. First met him back in '95. Pretty interesting character, in fact, very interesting character. Obviously he's a member of a group of 9 people who were very late in terms of their contact with non-Indigenous people. There was a series of welfare patrols that ventured out into the Western Desert from the late 1940s through to the 60s, and most of the people were contacted on those patrols. Warlimpirrnga's family were living in an area on the west side of Lake Mackay, which is incredibly remote, but the patrols didn't go out there, so they basically missed. And so whilst everyone else was being centralised at Papunya, they were still wandering around out there.
I first met Warlimpirrnga in 1984 when they came in from the bush. The group of 9 people who were called the Pintupi 9 made a huge impression in the Australian national imagination because they were the last people to come in from the bush, at least at that time. And there was a photographer out there, and these photographs got into the press, and the Pintupi were very protective of their relatives who'd come in from the press. They went to the Central Land Council and asked them to mediate with the government because the government was concerned to make sure that they were well, but they didn't trust anybody. And I had been working with Pintupi people since '73, and so I got a phone call in New York. Would I be willing to go out there? Well, of course I was very excited. I didn't even know that, I hardly knew that they had come in. So I flew out there, I spoke Pintupi, and I was an anthropologist, so I had these credentials which would allow me to speak to the government on their behalf with some kind of scientific authority. And that's when I met Warlimpirrnga. But Warlimpirrnga was an extraordinarily handsome young man. Of course, all the Pintupi at Kiwikura knew him. They were relatives who had been separated when the other Pintupi went in from the bush to Papunya mostly. And they knew him, they knew his family, they knew he was out there, but they hadn't really followed. So it was quite exciting. They spoke exactly the same language as the people I had done my field work with. I kind of built this rapport, and I really remember the respect that people had for him at that time, and he had this power that came from his life in the bush.
From a non-Indigenous perspective, I think it was nice to know that people were still living traditionally out there. But eventually that all came to an end, and they moved into Kiwikura in 1984. And he was very quickly provided with materials at the time, and was proven to be quite a proficient artist from the very beginning. Over the years, he's very much been at the forefront of the men's painting movement, and has really had no problem dealing with the size of the paintings. I have absolute empathy for those people and what they've had to change over the years in terms of their lifestyle. And you know, mainstream Australia's a bit short-sighted and not very understanding to believe that that's something that people should be able to do easily. You know, try the reverse. So the large-scale painting Mamultjunkunya, which is a site on the western side of Lake Mackay, it's a large-scale painting which is in the show, is an iconic painting. It's him in full flight. Brilliant work, tight, well-resolved, visually just sort of in your face, really strong picture. The site itself on the western side of Lake Mackay, it's a clay pan site. A number of different artists refer to the same site, but for Warlimpirrnga it's very much in his homeland. That's his true place there, that's his country.
I would say that one of the central issues of these paintings is the fact that the painters value them principally and strongly because they see their paintings as being anchored in the ancestral world of the dreaming, the stories of the dreaming, and the ceremonies that enact them. And the Western collectors of this art and exhibitors of this art are principally engaged with the aesthetic, formal qualities of the paintings. The painters refer their work to what they call chokorpa. They say that the paintings are chokortano, which means literally from the dreaming. The dreaming is a very complex cosmological concept that interpreters have struggled to explain to people. But fundamentally, chokorpa refers to a kind of ancestral realm that continues to coexist with the present, but the ancestral beings left the world behind as we know it. They created the world as it is. They left sources of power. They left the traditions that contemporary people have, but they're still there. They're not visible. They can be occasionally contacted. They reveal themselves, sometimes in dreams. So they are a power that continues to inform the world, but that are mostly contacted through ceremony and the revelation of these stories.
Warlimpirrnga, more often than not, will paint either one of 2 or 3 sites. The large-scale red and white painting in the exhibition, which is a depiction of the site known as Marawa, is very much his most celebrated site. That's exactly the land that he knows and was born into. It's obviously an attachment that he has that is very much part of his inspiration and subject matter for his paintings. If you asked him, "Who are you?" he'd sort of almost say Marawa. Yeah, I see these paintings not only in a topographical sense. I mean, certainly they are maps. They're mind maps, if you like. They're a visual representation of the landscape, but it's the layered component of the paintings. It's the story which, we get a snippet of, and that's all I believe we need. I mean, a lot of the information is obviously very sensitive. The information that comes with the painting is what the artist feels comfortable letting the viewer know. The paintings, they have a representation of the landscape itself. It's like a visual short story of the deeper meaning. And some of the paintings also have a body paint component to them, things that are very much reminiscent of designs that were either painted on the body or sometimes incised onto weapons and artefacts. So there's a number of different visual references that I get when I look at a painting.
These paintings have power. It's not always recognized how that power has to be handled. When the men started painting in the early 70s, they didn't really recognize where they might be going, and they understood them to be seen by people who, like them, would be initiated men, or men only and not children and not women, because they were restricted. When we had an exhibition of these paintings, early paintings, at the Gray Art Gallery at New York University in, I think, 2009, we had a number of these paintings, and we realized, after consulting with people in the community, that they still didn't want these paintings to be seen by people who were not appropriate to see them. And in their view, that was basically women and children. We couldn't stop people from seeing them, and we worked out a compromise in which we put the paintings downstairs, separate from all the other paintings, violating their art historical location, but in a separate area with a sign marking off this separate area saying that these paintings should be seen by men and that others should take this into account in their decisions. Now, when 2 Pintupi women came here in relationship to the show, they were very relieved to find out that the paintings that they shouldn't see were not anywhere around where they might wander into. That, to me, was the most successful part of the show.
The 2 large-scale paintings in the show obviously started their journey at Documenta, which was a bit of a surprise when we got the invitation, but certainly something that we took very seriously and were very keen to be a part of. They were up there for quite a lengthy time. I know they had massive figures through the door, hundreds of thousands of people that go to that show. Fabulous exposure, and obviously seen by lots of very influential people. We were then obviously in touch with the Shoal collection and were informed that 2 works were under consideration, and we thought that was a very good home for them. So we were quite happy with that in the end. I'm not sure Warlimpirrnga's view of his personal spot in the international art world would be one that we would think it was. I mean, he's a very, very confident, very proud Pintubi man. Regardless of the fact that his paintings were hanging in Castle as part of Documenta, I think regardless of that, he would still consider himself, you know, a pretty successful individual. Those guys out there, I think I've referred to having pretty big egos. They're very confident, proud men, and you know, he doesn't need his paintings to be hanging in an old museum in Germany to think that he's not a great painter, because he's already got that view.